Hey everyone, how are you today? So today this isn't going to be as long of a lecture. We're going to be talking about the end of chapter 13, and this really focuses on how the United States is going to continue to try to be neutral as World War II is beginning. But then on December 7th, 1941, the Japanese, of course, attack Pearl Harbor, and that's when everything is going to change. And, the president will say to Congress, this is a date that will live in infamy, and I ask you to declare war because obviously the death of 3,000 Americans is unacceptable. And there's debate to this day about how much FDR knew about the attack on Pearl Harbor, whether he knew about it or not. And of course, your major assignment that's due today is you had to read the primary and secondary sources about why the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and kind of read and assess those and analyze them and then answer those questions. And then for tomorrow, you have to come up with your thesis. Sorry about that. You have to come up with your thesis or your claim statement, right, which explains, why, why the Japanese may have attacked with your three reasons, looking back at those documents. And hopefully these notes will help to come up with those reasons. And then you're going to be writing your rough draft. Remember, you're not writing a full 5-paragraph essay here. You're going to be writing the introduction paragraph and the first 2 body paragraphs, where you're explaining 2 out of your 3 reasons, basically. But you're still using 3 different documents to support your views and a quote and all those other rules we've talked about. And then we'll have one more writing assignment later this year where you write the full-fledged 5-paragraph essay. So just as a recap, Hideki Tojo, remember, is the military leader of Japan. Technically, there is Emperor Hirohito in power, but Tojo, we said, had really kind of gained fame and really critical acclaim after his work in Manchuria. Remember, Japan took over Manchuria for resources. Tojo comes to power as this militaristic dictator who creates a police state where the people have no rights whatsoever. And then we know that he, continues to suppress people, take away their free speech, free press. There's really only one political party. It's basically a type of fascism, but it's more the idea that people are doing, trusting in the military. So it's not just they're trusting in Tojo, they're trusting in the military as a whole. So it's a little bit different than what we see in Italy and Germany, where they're just trusting in Mussolini or Hitler per se. And so, of course, remember that Japan thinks that they are a superior nation in terms of their bloodline. It is this racist ideology. They think that they have the right to take over other Asian nations that can't fight back. So they've already taken over Korea. And now they made this excuse to take over Manchuria, remember, by pretending that they'd attacked them. But in reality, they staged that whole attack on those trains. And then by 1937, Japan goes ahead and they attack China because that's basically their main goal is to take over China to gain those resources, that land, the population. And China, despite the fact that it has a larger population, the army is untrained, they lack technology and modern weaponry, and the people are fighting amongst themselves about whether they should be communist or nationalist. And so it's very difficult for them to have kind of a true resistance. And then Japan is really interested in going on an island hopping campaign, meaning they're trying to take over all the rest of the islands and the Southeastern Asian continent where Vietnam is, because they're looking for territories with coal, with iron, with resources, and with oil. And it's during this time period that Japan, already had that alliance with Germany, but of course it officially becomes one of the Axis powers when it creates this tripartite pact. And so all for one, one for all, with the Germans, the Italians, and the Japanese supporting each other. Russia, of course, is at first an ally of Germany, but not for long. Of course, then they switch to the Allied side in this war. And America, of course, we said during all of World War II, from 1939 to 1941, attempts to remain neutral. Remember, FDR had gotten elected for a 3rd term, promising to stay out of the war. Early on in the 1930s, remember, our policy was we were going to be completely neutral. We weren't going to sell goods to any country that was at war or give them a loan. After Spain's Civil War, we saw an opportunity to make money, so we had switched it to a cash and carry policy where we were going to sell them goods if they would pick them up. And we see that, this anger towards war just continues on because America is, of course, still in the midst of the Depression. Sorry about that, everyone. That was a little minute music here. So, yeah, I kind of lost my train of thought there for a second. But America is still all about remaining neutral, right? There's the Nye Committee, which believes that we only got involved in World War I because it was a trick and that it was just a way for gun manufacturers to get rich. This America First Committee is putting out all sorts of propaganda saying we shouldn't go to war, Americans will die, it'll cost money, it just doesn't involve us. And so we continue just to kind of stay neutral, do our own thing for the most part. Um, Now that's what FDR is putting on, publicly. In reality, we think behind the scenes, he was realizing it was inevitable before the United States would enter World War II. Winston Churchill, head of Great Britain, was sending him tons of correspondence saying, look, I'm the only real Allied power left. Hitler has taken over all of Europe. We are struggling here to fight back against this blitz. Now he's turned against, Russia. So Russia's technically our ally, but they are getting their butts whooped. And the people are getting starved potentially into submission here at Leningrad. We need all the help and the support we can get. Can't you do something? Can't you give us guns, weapons, soldiers, something? Otherwise we're not sure we can hold up against Hitler and these Axis powers forever. So eventually, FDR is going to be swayed by the arguments made by Winston Churchill, and he is going to come up with a program called Lend-Lease, where basically we say, okay, we're going to lend you whatever supplies and materials you need right now. We know you can't pay us, but you can pay us later, and we'll kind of lease our tanks to you. We're not using some of these tanks and some of these, weapons and guns and other products and airplane parts. We will lend them to you, or we'll put them on kind of a lease program where you kind of make payments and, pay us later for all this goods, because obviously we know that you're really struggling. Now, overall, the Lend-Lease program is not a bad deal for Americans because, we are selling goods. Unlike World War I, where we were focusing on selling to both sides and making a profit, here in World War II, we from the very beginning are kind of like Germans are the enemy, Hitler's the enemy. We clearly support the British and the French. They were our allies in the past. They're still our allies. We're going to sell to them. And we were only kind of selling them a moderate amount of goods. But now we're starting to really, sell more stuff to them. And you can see in this political cartoon here, it's truly encouraging how much of this stuff drifts into British ports. What that's cartoon's basically getting at. And that one's by Dr. Seuss, if you notice. And supposedly, according to our cash and carry policy, we weren't supposed to be dropping off stuff to them, but guess what? We were dropping off stuff to them. And so we were willing to do whatever it took to make a profit. Americans are looking at this as an opportunity. We're going to put people back to work. We're going to get our unemployment down to, 6, 7, 8%. Once we actually get involved in the war, it's going to drop down to like 2%. And we're going to make all these wartime products and give them to the British, give them, to the Russians. We're going to consider them an ally as well. And we're going to be giving out this stuff and basically getting payment for it basically later. Now, the other interesting thing about the Lend-Lease program is obviously, to Hitler's perspective, he's like, how can you claim you're a neutral country when you're giving all these supplies to the British and the Russians, but not to us? You're saying you're neutral and you're not fighting and you're not in this war, but it seems like in your hearts and minds and in your wallets, you're definitely not neutral. And honestly, we really weren't, because some people estimate that we're basically giving Britain at this point about $50 billion worth of goods and supplies so they can continue to fight against, the British and build more planes and things of that nature. We also know during this time period that FDR is perhaps very concerned about what's happening in Japan and the fact that Japan is starting to island hop and take over more territory. And the reason we're interested is because, remember, the United States owns the Philippines. We had taken that over during the Spanish-American War, and it was creating a nice little profit for Americans. Plus, we had Americans stationed over there, and we didn't want to see part of our own empire threatened. So we're definitely hypocrites, talking about how we believe in self-determination and everybody has the right to rule themselves, and yeah, we have a colony that we are profiting off of. So we're sending Japan all these messages saying, get away from our colony, move back, you're getting too close, we feel like this is a threat. No differently than we had years ago in the Progressive era, right? When President Theodore Roosevelt, his cousin, had talked about if anyone tried to, take over territory in Central or South America, we would see that as a threat to the U.S. And he talked about how it was an add-on to the Monroe Doctrine. So basically, stay out of the Western Hemisphere if you know what's good for you. They called it the Roosevelt Corollary early on. So, we're getting pretty offended here, and FDR feels like it's just a matter of time before we get involved in this war. So, FDR and Churchill actually met in secret off the coast of Newfoundland, and they talked about how within the next year, FDR foresaw that they would be in the war, and what would their goals be? Would they try to focus on Japan first? Would they focus on Germany first? Would they focus on Italy? Because, you see fighting with Italy in Africa, with Germany in Europe, and with Japan trying to take over all of Asia. And so where do you attack first, basically? Or do you just defend Britain? I mean, what's the plan here? And they also agreed that after World War II is over, they would create an international peacekeeping group known as the United Nations, that the League of Nations would be dissolved because it was ineffective, that the US and Britain would be major players in this group, and that they would use military action if necessary, as well as, humanitarian aid, giving out food, medicine, and talking through issues in diplomatic means. But they would do whatever was necessary to stop future wars because they wholeheartedly believed in peace and self-determination. But in this case, they felt like peace and diplomatic actions may be off the table. And so this is what I was talking about here. So you see Japan, and Japan, of course, has already taken over Korea. They annexed that back, started doing it in 1905 and officially annexed it in 1910. Then in 1931, they started their invasion of Manchuria, finishing that up in 1932. And then by 1937, they had started attacking like Nanking and Shanghai. You can see that area in the eastern coast of China. And then they started to attack, and they really kind of were able to gain that area. You can see it's all in brown by December 7th of 1941. And then they started attacking other areas off to the left. So they're looking for more and more land. And they're starting to get interested into what you see as French Indochina. That'd be like Vietnam. And there's the Philippines, kind of right in the middle. So you can see why the U.S. is concerned that their island is going to be next, because it was full of coal and natural resources. And Japan was also looking at New Zealand. They were looking at Australia, smaller islands like the U.S.-owned Guam there, the Mariana Islands, the Marshall Islands. They were going to take it all. And of course, they're not far at this point from Hawaii. Hawaii is not actually in this map. Hawaii is really just off to the east of this map. But, Hawaii, and then, of course, the coastline of the United States with California is within range of an attack. And so FDR becomes nervous that perhaps, Japan would take the Philippines, Guam, and then who knows, perhaps even attack the United States. So he starts demanding that, Japan is trying to conquer all of Asia, make what they call the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, where they control all trade and assets. And we send messages to them, saying you need to back off. Otherwise, we're going to see this as a threat. And Japan basically doesn't respond too kindly. They do dispatch some ambassadors to the U.S. And so the U.S. ambassador and Japanese ambassador kind of talk through issues, but nothing really gets resolved. And during this time period, we're starting to really crack some more of the secret codes that Japan is sending out. And they're not really having anything positive to say. They're just interested in taking more and more land to fuel their empire. And so we're very wary of that. And a lot of the land, if you noticed in your primary and secondary sources that they're taking, is areas with oil so that they can continue to fuel their planes, their tanks, their weaponry, to create this empire. So in response to the fact that they're not listening to the president and that they're kind of ignoring us and we feel that they're being disrespectful, all the, stocks, bonds, money, companies that they own and control in the U.S., we freeze those assets. So we basically cut them off from some of their wealth and basically say, no, you don't have access to it. We also put out an embargo. And an embargo is basically where you refuse to trade with someone. Sorry about that. Lots of interruptions today between the bell and minute music, and somebody was printing like 100 pages there. But what I was saying was that Japan's trying to take over all these specific islands because they know that they have oil and they need them for their tanks and all their different weapons. And yeah, we obviously are nervous about this and the fact they're being disrespectful. So we freeze their assets in the U.S. So if they did have money in U.S. banks, which they did, if they owned stock in, different companies, we're basically not letting them play the market. We're not letting them have access to some of their accounts and their funds, so we're blocking them from making money. And then we also put out an embargo, which is where we have refused to trade with them. And so they had been getting about 80% of their oil from the United States at that point. And it was coming from Texas for the most part. And we cut them off and we say, we're not going to trade with you. We're not going to sell you any more oil. So this, unfortunately, was kind of a problem. We thought if we cut them off from oil, that would stop them from attacking more islands, like it would slow down their war machine. But in a way, it also propelled them forward because now they felt like they had to conquer other islands to get oil because now they needed a new source of it. And naturally, relations between the two countries are breaking down. The Japanese are very proud. They're very honorable. They feel like they're very, respectful people. They didn't understand our actions. They felt like we were just pushing them into war. And they felt like, that we should recognize that they were, the superior Asian nation, that they had a right, they felt like, to conquer others. And, now we're taking away basically some of their money. We're taking some of their oil. They want to create this empire. They felt like we're backing them in a corner. And so naturally, it's leading, closer and closer to an attack. And so ultimately, the Japanese decide that war with the United States is inevitable. They feel like it's going to happen eventually because they want to take over all of Asia, and we have the Philippines, and we're standing in their way. And, first we were standing in their way with, China because we were trying to help them, and then we were standing in their way by taking away their oil. And now they really just want the Philippines as well, and they just figure they're gonna come to war with us. So they figure it's better to strike first, strike hard, strike fast. And their thought process is they want to attack Pearl Harbor, that no one thought that it could happen. People didn't even think that, the Japanese planes would have enough fuel to fly from Japan to Hawaii and back. And they figured they're going to take out, our fleet and destroy as many battleships as possible so that if they destroyed our Pacific fleet and take out our battleships, we basically won't be able to come back after them and fight battles in the Pacific. And they'll be able to still conquer all these other island nations in the Pacific as they see fit. The idea is if war is going to happen, you want to be the one who is striking first. Yes, you're bringing war on you, but if you feel it's going to happen eventually, you want to be in control of it. You want to have the element of surprise, which they did because no one thought that the Japanese would have bombs that would be able to work pretty much in this area. It's a mountainous region, it's got, just a hard area to navigate. And then they didn't think that they'd be able to drop any bombs that would be able to, destroy those ships. They also thought that you couldn't get subs into that area, that the harbor was too shallow. And so the whole thing, in a sense, is a surprise. Now, some people say that it wasn't a surprise, that FDR knew the attack was coming. Obviously, we were working on breaking some of their codes. And so some people say the codes had been broken earlier. Other people say, no, we basically broke the codes right as the attack was happening. There's a lot of debate about that, but obviously in the morning of December 7th of 1941, which is a Sunday morning, they attacked very early. Some people had seen on the radar, because of course there is radar now, that an attack was coming, but they thought that it was just, a bunch of B-52s coming in from the mainland, so they didn't realize that it was an attack from Japan. And so they come in, of course, and they attack. And as they take down our planes, as they take down our ships, some of our ships, thank goodness, were out. They were not in, at Pearl Harbor. So luckily the whole fleet will not get destroyed, which is lucky. That's why some people say it was a conspiracy, because they say, why did, FDR send some of them away? Other people look and say it's a conspiracy because they say, well, how come all the planes were close together? Supposedly, our government put a lot of the planes close together, not because we wanted to have nice, easy targets for the Japanese to just take them out in one row, but they were close together because we were worried about sabotage, and that way they were easier to basically watch over, because you could see, here's one plane, here's another plane, they're not spaced out. It wouldn't be possible for some person to sneak in there and, have some kind of malfunction with the engine. But the Japanese come in and, of course, take out a lot of our planes, take out a lot of our ships. The most famous, of course, is the USS Arizona, where overall about 3,000 people die. And we'll talk more about this attack here after break a little bit. But that's it for now. And hopefully you can use the ideas on this page to come up with your thesis statement and then to start writing your rough draft. All right, guys, have a great day. Later.